Welcome to Divine Feminine Rising with Mezdulene. I'm Mezdulene, and my intention with this podcast is to entertain, educate, and illuminate as I share the power and magic of the Divine Feminine. Thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful for your time and attention. In this episode, I want to talk about the energy of emotions. There's really only two emotional energies, love and fear. Everything else stems from those two emotions. Fear emotions include anger, anxiety, shame, frustration, envy, etc. And love emotions include, of course, love, compassion, joy, happiness, and contentment. I think that for me, being as loving as possible is also being in the flow of the divine feminine. I wanted to talk about the energy of anger first and how I used to think anger was a bad thing because I grew up seeing the cause and effects of anger. And I came to understand that the emotion of energy wasn't bad. It was what people did with that emotion that could be harmful. So, for instance, just a story about myself. Many moons ago in my first marriage, we were going to go to a movie, and my husband was dilly-dallying, and he knew I hated to miss the first part of the movie, and he finally got in the car, and I knew we were going to be late, and by then I was just super mad, and I backed up the car around the corner of our driveway and was ready to take off down the hill, and he jumped out of the door. And to this day, he tells people that my anger pushed him out of the car. And so maybe it did. I don't know. I was pretty angry. I wasn't yelling or anything, but the energy of my anger was strong. I had something similar a few years later. I was a massage therapist, and I was doing a massage on a man, and he was laying face up on the table. And suddenly he flipped the sheet down and said, I want you to massage this muscle. I instantly felt rage, and I yanked the sheet back over him, and I said, that's not a muscle, turn over. And I started massaging his leg, and I realized I was angry, and I by then understood that this wasn't a good thing to be massaging someone while I was angry, and so I decided to calm down because I didn't want to put my energy into this person. And it was too late. He suddenly said, I have to throw up. And I went out of the room, and he jumped up and went in the bathroom and threw up. And when I came back, he was gone, and he'd left money on the table. So I learned that I had to be careful with angry energy, right? On the other hand, I found out that the energy of anger could be actually a healing thing. And I know that just sounds really weird, but let me tell you this story. I used to be a hospice volunteer, and I had this one client who was very close to dying. The doctors gave her 24 hours maximum to live because all of her organs were shutting down, and her partner was not able to deal with this, so she had called an ambulance and had her taken to the hospital. So I went to the hospital to visit this woman, and I was on my way out of town. I had to catch a plane to go on vacation somewhere. And so I came in her room, and she said, I need a cigarette. And I said, well, I don't think that's possible. And she says, what do you mean? I want a cigarette, with her rough voice, right? And she had lung cancer, and she was on oxygen. And so obviously a cigarette wasn't a good idea. Anyway, I told her that I couldn't help her, that I just came to say goodbye, that I was going on vacation. And I left and I went on vacation. And when I came back, I decided to go to her house and give her partner my condolences. So I knocked on the door, and it took a few minutes, but I heard someone coming, and I waited, and the door opened, and there was the dying person. She was using a walker, but she was walking, and she answered the door. And I said, "Well, hello, I didn't expect to see you here." And she invited me in, and she told me the story of what happened after I left the hospital. She said that she called the nurse, and the nurse said she couldn't smoke, and she was just so furious that she got herself out of bed, got herself into a wheelchair, rolled herself outside so that she could have a cigarette. And she started feeling better. And the end of that story is she lived 2 more years and did not die of cancer. She died of something else. So the power of emotion is strong. Another fear emotion is grief or sadness, and there is just no way around grief. The only way is going through it. It can be all-consuming, and it just colors your world completely differently. And it becomes, for many people, all they can think about. And when someone loses a loved one, there's no time limit on grief. And so I have found some people being judgmental towards other people. Well, they should have gotten over that by now. Or people are judgmental about themselves. I should have gotten past this grief by now. No, there is no getting around it, only going through it. And it takes some people longer than others. And that's okay. It's important that we be there for someone who's grieving. And even though we may also be grieving, but it's just so important to be there for them. And don't talk about their grief. Let them talk about it if they want to. But since it is an all-consuming emotion, it's nice to talk about other topics and give them a distraction. And that makes me think about when people are dying. People often avoid people who are dying because they don't want to feel the feels. But mostly people have told me they don't want to go see someone because they don't know what to say. And I tell them, what you say is hello. And then you tell them your news. You share what your kid did, or you share about the book you just read, or the movie you just watched, or current events. I've talked to people on their deathbeds and asked them about this. I have asked them, when people come to visit you, what do you want to talk about? And they say, I don't want to talk about dying. I don't want to talk about my pain. I'm sick and tired of that subject. I want to talk about anything but that. So it's really a distraction for people who are in so much pain if they can think about something else and talk about something else. So don't be afraid to go and support your friend, whether they're deep in grief or actually passing into the next realm. Another emotion that carries a lot of energy is shame. I know a lot of people who carry shame, and for most of them, it's shame because of something someone else did to them. I know as a child, I was conditioned to feel shame. I was told I was an awful child, and that my mother was ashamed of me and embarrassed by me. And so shame was an emotion that traveled with me for a long time until I understood that I did nothing to be ashamed of. I was an innocent child. And that the shame belonged to my mother for being so abusive, not me. Another very common example is women who have been raped. They feel shame around their violation. They often blame themselves for wearing something or going somewhere, thinking that something they did caused the rape. And this is societal conditioning, that women somehow tempted the rapist, when the reality is the rapist isn't coming from an emotion of desire, but the emotion of rage. If you feel shame because of something that was done to you, please transfer that shame to the perpetrator. If you really did something that caused you shame, forgive yourself so that you can move forward. The energy of anger, sadness, and shame is something we can't avoid. However, we can avoid using that energy to hurt other people or ourselves. I think we've all witnessed angry arguments and how one person unloads their anger on the other person, and then that person throws their angry energy back. This can be so easily avoided. When you become more conscious of the energy of emotions, you also understand how that energy can be used for harm or for good. If it's anger, walk away and calm down. Once you're calm, then you can come back and talk to the other person and tell them that what happened upset you and have a discussion about it. This is a way to deal with anger without either becoming ugly about it or swallowing it and allowing it to fester inside of you. You can talk it through once you become calm. Believe me, if you want to be heard, talking through a problem is much more productive than throwing angry energy at someone, because as soon as you do that, they stop listening and they go into defensive mode and they either shut down, that's my MO, or they throw that anger back at you, mixed with their own, right? I truly believe that love is the most powerful force in the universe. If we all loved each other, there would be no war, no hungry children, no prejudice, racism, or murder. It seems like such a simple concept, but the reality is much different. I'm not talking about romantic love here, but more about brotherly love. All humans feel the energy of emotions. All of us bleed the same and want the same things for our families. We want them to be safe and to be loved and to be happy, and we want that for ourselves also. We've been conditioned to be afraid of people who aren't like ourselves and conditioned to mind our own business. I feel really strongly that it's time to uncondition ourselves. It's time to love everyone, whether they're like us or not. It's time to understand that what other people experience is our business in an energetic way, because emotion is energy and all energy is connected. So if someone anywhere in the world is suffering, their emotion causes a ripple in the energetic field. We are all connected, and it's time to understand that our emotions have impact far beyond our own little insular world. When we feel love, that also causes a ripple in the energetic field. Imagine if we all focused on love and felt that emotion of love in our lives much more strongly than the emotions around fear. Imagine the change that could happen in the world. Love is the power. I believe the ultimate power. So I'll tell you what I mean by that and give you an example. I was an unwanted and unloved child who only knew anger and pain. When I was 9, a new family moved into the neighborhood. The parents were missionaries who had just moved back from Africa, and they were the talk of the neighborhood gossip because their little children ran around naked like they did when they lived in Africa. The mother's name was Sandy Bakaboy. I'll never forget her as long as I live. She was the first person I ever felt love from, the first person in my life, and it was life-altering for me. She truly loved me, and I felt that energy coming from her. Unfortunately, my mother noticed, and one day when she was mad at me, she told me she was going to tell Mrs. Bakaboy what an awful child I was. And after that, I stopped going to Mrs. Bakaboy's house because I was afraid she'd stop loving me once she knew who I really was. I felt so much shame, and it really wasn't my shame, right? I know it's a sad story, but the point I want to make here is that during a very brief time in my childhood, maybe 4 or 5 months, I felt loved, and it changed my life. It changed my entire life. I felt the energy of love, and I wanted to give and receive more of that energy. Once I knew what that felt like, I knew that I wanted to be like Mrs. Bakaboy and be a loving person in the world. Even though I was just a little girl, it was a pivotal point in my life that guided me directly toward the energy of love. Compassion is the emotion that helps us care about others. It compels us to help others who are less fortunate or who are suffering. Compassion drives us to want to make the world a better place. So where I live, there's a lot of homeless people. Fortunately, the weather isn't too extreme here, but it really tugs my compassion strings when I see people sleeping on the sidewalk in cold weather. I can't help but feel compassion for them and want to help them. Joy is the emotion that leads to bliss and holds the energy of the divine. At least that's how I think of it. So once I was on the big island of Hawaii, and I wasn't in a very good place. I was there to try and heal my emotional body. I was very depressed. And I went to a class taught by a kahuna. And a kahuna is a holy person who lives and teaches huna in Hawaii. This man said that joy and spirituality were connected, and that the degree to which you were in alignment with joy was the degree to which you were in alignment with spirit, and that the degree you were out of alignment with joy was the degree that you were out of alignment with spirit. This was a big lesson for me. I think that most humans tend to have a tendency to hold on to negative emotions more than positive ones. And so that energy of fear, sometimes becomes a stronger force in our lives. So I've always remembered what that kahuna said. And I check in with myself. Okay, am I feeling joy? Am I feeling in alignment with spirit? It's so important. So there are times in your life when you have felt unadulterated joy. And I think it's important to remember that feeling, to imagine feeling that feeling, remember what caused it, perhaps the situation or whatever, and then hold that feeling in your heart. Keep it there so that you can refer to it when you need it, right? For me, the ultimate joy in my life was the birth of my children. I can't think of anything more joyful than the moment my babies entered the world. So happiness is really our ultimate goal, or it seems to be for most people. And what I want you to know about happiness is that it's definitely an inside job. I remember my first husband, he was one of those people looking on the outside for happiness. When I get that new motorcycle, I'll be happy. Well, how long did that last? It lasted as long as it took to have another motorcycle come on the market that looked even better. So then maybe that one would make him happy, right? And I've talked to people who think they'll be happy when they get a new home, or they'll be happy when they find their perfect husband, or they'll be happy when they make that trip to Spain that they've always wanted to make. And those outer things may bring a brief energy of happiness, right? But it's the inner things that will bring long-term happiness. So what does that mean? It means that healing and self-growth, learning the power of forgiveness and loving yourself are all pathways to happiness. When you turn your focus on healing your own wounds and knowing that you're whole, worthy, and divine just the way you are, you will achieve true happiness. No one and no thing can give you that. It's something you can only give yourself. And you deserve it, okay? I'm just telling you right now, you deserve happiness. So the energy of emotions can create change, but negative emotion creates change out of fear, and positive emotion creates change out of love. So which do you think is the better foundation to build change on? I'll use parenting as an example. One parent yells at their kids, tells them if they jump off the roof again, they'll be spanked or grounded. I remember my own parents, when I'd say, why? They'd say, because I said so. So the kid usually doesn't do the thing again, at least for a while, because they're afraid to do it. The child doesn't understand that what they did might have scared the heck out of their parents, and that their anger was because of fear for their safety. Another parent in the same situation calms down, then sits down with their child and asks the child, why did you jump off the roof? Then the kid tells them why, that they thought they could fly, or that they just wanted to see if they bounced, or whatever their explanation was. And then the parent understands why they did it. And then they can go forward and explain to them why that wasn't a good choice, and what a better choice might have been, and what they might do in the future when they make choices. They might also tell the child how much they love them, and how it scares them to think anything harmful might happen to them, and how when they jumped off the roof, they could have really hurt themselves, and how they would have been so sad if their child was hurt. And it just scared them to think about that. So which kid felt seen, heard, and loved? Which kid has a better understanding of the situation and now understands that they have choices? This is just one idea of how the energy of emotions can be used. It's important that we all know that we have a choice in how we use that energy, whether we're kids or adults. So being conscious of energy of emotions helps us to make decisions based on that energy. When I first began to understand this, I would take a second and ask myself if what I was feeling or the action I was about to take was based on fear or love. I was conditioned by my own parenting and society to mostly feel fear, and it was a lot of work, but I reconditioned myself to stay in the energy of love most of the time. It's not that I never feel fear, I just choose not to stay in the energy of fear once I recognize it. I have also used fear as a tool for personal growth. Sometimes what I fear is something that shows me I have an opportunity to work through something. For instance, I used to have extreme social anxiety, and I was afraid to be in groups of people. I understood that was fear energy, and I pushed myself to overcome that anxiety. I looked at the energy and saw that walking into a room full of people was not going to cause me harm, and I looked for the positive reasons for being there and focused on that. To be honest, I really do love people, so it wasn't that big of a hurdle. But here's another example. As much as I love the ocean, and I truly dearly love the ocean, and I live right next to it, I am deeply afraid of the deep water of the ocean. I can snorkel because that's just floating on top, and looking down through my goggles. But the thought of scuba diving is absolutely terrifying. I have no idea where this fear came from. I did almost drown as a young child, but that was in a pool, and I'm not afraid of the deep end of the pool. So anyway, one time I signed up to snorkel on the big island of Hawaii, and we all climbed on this rubber Zodiac boat thing that had a huge engine, and we flew over the waves out to Captain Cook's sanctuary or whatever it's called. And I was so excited because I heard it was the best snorkeling place in the entire Hawaiian Islands, right? What I didn't know was that because of the fragility of the reef, the boat stopped far from the reef, and we had to jump into water that was over 100 feet deep and swim to the reef. I was truly afraid. Panicked is a better word. So I did some deep breathing to try and calm myself down, told myself that I was safe, and that my fear was irrational, but my fear was real, okay? So then I watched a few people jump in and told myself, well, they didn't die. And if they didn't die, I'm not going to die, right? So anyway, what I do in situations like that is I kind of put my rational mind aside and I just go for it. And I jumped in. And then I swam over to the reef. I didn't die. I wasn't bitten by anything or caused any kind of harm. I just experienced pure joy and bliss as I looked into a different world full of colorful fish and beautiful coral formations. And I even saw a wolf eel and just, so many kinds of wildlife. It was exquisite. So it was truly worth overcoming that fear of swimming in deep water. And as I swam back to the boat, crossing over that deep, deep water, I didn't feel any fear at all. I just retained that feeling of joy. So the reality is we're only born with two innate fears, the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. The rest of the fears we have are learned fears. So when I feel the energy of fear, I stop, go inside to see what it's telling me, and then I choose whether or not to push through it and to do the thing anyway. As for love, I made a commitment to myself when I was a child to be as loving as possible in the world. I may have grown up without love, except for that brief interaction with a neighbor, but I always knew that love was the ultimate goal. As an adult, I've committed to being as unconditionally loving as possible. The result of this is a life filled with love, and I mean my life is filled with love. Remember that what you focus on is what you'll see more of. I drive a red van. It's a Dodge Caravan, and now I see them everywhere, but I never noticed them before I got my own van. It's the same thing with emotional energy. If you focus on fear, you'll feel more fear. If you focus on love, you'll feel more love. My hope is that you will focus on love because you deserve to have a life filled with love, joy, and happiness. Thank you for joining me today. My mission is to help bring back the balance of the divine feminine to spirituality. Please share my podcasts with anyone who might be interested in the divine feminine and personal empowerment. And if you'd like to connect with me further, feel free to reach out. You can find me at Mezdulene.com, Divine Feminine Rising with Mezdulene.com, Mezdulene Bliss or Mezdulene on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. And also please join my mailing list if you'd like to receive my newsletter. Allow the light of your love to shine. Be the change. Lead the way. And always remember your light of love is a needed gift to the world that only you can give.